Now, I will still argue this was my pick for holiday special this year. This will probably go out in early December, so happy holidays, folks. I hope things are looking a little brighter than they are right now when we're recording it.
Yep.
But I picked Night of the Hunter, which is a 1957 film directed by Charles Laughton, who was a very successful British stage actor and later film actor during the 20s, 30s, 40s. He was in a couple different Alfred Hitchcock films. He was in The Old Dark House, directed by James Whale, who also brought us Frankenstein and the Bride of Frankenstein from Universal. And this was his directorial debut. And it did so poorly that he never directed again. But the film is about a preacher/serial killer named Harry Powell, played by Robert Mitchum, who is in prison with a man who stole $10,000 and hid it somewhere on his family's farm or family's property, telling his children, don't tell anybody where this is. And in prison, Powell finds out about the money and decides that he'd like a piece of that. And so after he gets out of prison, he makes his way to his cellmate's hometown to find that money and infiltrate the family in any way that he can. Doesn't sound very Christmassy, but I swear it gets there eventually. And apparently it was also shown on television a lot around Christmas back in like the 70s and 80s. So what did we think of Night of the Hunter, a Christmas movie?
It is a Christmas movie.
Okay.
I'm going to allow it, Zach. For most of my watch, I was like, this is not a holiday movie. Zach's shanghaied me one too many times. But I do think the ending gets you there. And there's enough of a thematic importance to the timing of the holidays and what the movie as a whole says about humanity and the struggle that the kids go through. I think it lands itself in at least Christmas or holiday adjacent territory, which I know I've exploited for our holiday specials multiple times already. So I think that's totally fine. When I saw both of your reviews, and Mitchell's review came out, for him at least, unusually early in recent runnings, because usually Mitchell's like holding it down till we record, and it's a reveal. And I saw that both of you gave this a 3, and I was like, oh, this is going to be like Get Out or something, where we all say this is good, and I'm just like, you guys aren't giving it enough credit. And there's a little bit of that for me. I think this is quite great, especially for its time. I gave it a 4, and like both of you, I was really impressed by Robert Mitchum's performance, which can really turn on a dime at any moment. I'm sure he'll be the main topic of conversation today. But I was also pleased to learn more about Charles Laughton, because I had just watched Witness for the Prosecution, in which Laughton plays this very like character role of an old British counselor who's in very poor health, but is retained to be defense counsel in this case. And I just had no clue that I had watched Witness right before watching Night of the Hunter, and I had zero idea of the connection. So that was kind of like a fun small world moment. I think the way Laughton visually directs is amazing, and the way he frames certain things. I think the most iconic and everlasting shot to me is the one of Harper's wife after she's drowned, just like in the water. Like that's like a how did he do that moment for me. I was really impressed by this. I don't have many complaints, and I look forward to strawmanning yours.
Leading. Robert Mitchum is a great singer, and he's also apparently a great actor. He was between that and a lot of the expressionist shots that have like an otherworldliness to them. Those are like my favorite parts of the film, I think. I can say from the outset, I was more interested, and by the latter half, it started to get a little bit boring for me. I feel like some of the scenes really drag, and I almost feel like it gets too enveloped into the artistry and emotion of the specific scenes. Um, like what's her name with the shotgun and everything. I mean, you basically know how the scene's gonna end, right? And it's not like that is an issue, or that's not like an expectation, especially with films of this nature coming out at this time. You know, there's a certain level of simplicity and cliche that you would expect, and it kind of wore on me a little bit, and I think the kids probably put the nail in the coffin for me. I think that how I mean, they're kids. You know, it's you can't really have high expectations for them, which is fine. But I just think with how pivotal a role they had in the story, considering they're like the pivot point, to get to the money for most of it, it's like, yeah, they're kind of important. I feel like they have pretty significant roles in this. So I think that was definitely an issue. But just in general, I mean, Robert Misham's character is like I every time he was on the screen, I was like, I am super engaged right now. Like this guy makes me really want to listen to what he's saying, and just kind of having a dual personality and almost like a bipolar type deal where he'll like immediately like turn a switch on, and there's almost like an alcoholism cliche to that, where it's like he's all of a sudden he's just turning loose on the kids and takes it out on them, and a lot of those scenes are very jarring, very surprising, especially knowing the standards of the time. Not to mention the obvious preacher issue. Like that's a pretty big threat to societal standards there. Anybody who's remotely like Christian probably got a very, at least somewhat offended by that depiction. And I think that's from an artistic point of view is very pointed and really like comes across. It doesn't feel like it's doing it, it's just for the plot or anything. It very much feeds into his character traits. I just thought that was really engaging, but yeah, everything else, it was there was a lot of run of the mill moments, a bit surprising, to be honest. But I mean, overall, it was still really good. I mean, and I just, it just there was parts of it where I was like, oh, this is like a 4D chess moment. Like they're really thinking big. Like this is gonna turn out to be like a big conspiracy, or this will be like a, it'll take you off your feet, in a plot sort of way, and it just never really does that for me. But I will say, in contained moments, there are some really, really memorable moments, especially with Robert Mitchum. So that's why I gave it a 3.
Yeah, and I think that preacher issue was considered a problem at the time as well. This was, I don't know if it was produced by United Artists, but it was distributed by United Artists at least. And United Artists has had a patchy history of going bankrupt and then reviving and then going bankrupt and being bought out again. But at least at the time, they were considered kind of the first production company by and for artists. It was founded by Charlie Chaplin, D.W. Griffith, Mary Pickford, Douglas Fairbanks, big stars of the silent era who wanted independence from the studios. And so they founded their own studio to put out these more kind of independent projects. But I think even for them, they were kind of like, all right, Charles, we need to talk brass tacks here, because kind of different to the way cinematic distribution works today. In the 50s and the 40s and most of the early 20th century leading up to like the 80s, there were individual cinemas in states in which movies would kind of open, and then they'd get a wider release where they kind of built out state by state. But that meant that, individual states had their own sort of standards for what they would show on screen in cinemas in their states. They had sort of like decency committees. And a lot of states, I think particularly in the South, did take issue to a preacher being depicted as a villain. I did give this a 3. But for me, this is one of those 3s that is in some ways better than some 4s. I think I've talked before about how a 3 can be a movie that comes out to being just good, but has some really creative, dynamic stuff in it that maybe doesn't necessarily make it a great movie, but does make it a more interesting watch than something that has, you know, the slab-like solidity of a great four, but maybe isn't as entertaining or interesting as a movie like Night of the Hunter could be. Because this is an incredibly influential film. If you know anything about movies at all and have seen any of, you know, the Sight and Sound Top 100, you're going to recognize moments in this that have been basically copied and pasted into other movies. Powell's kind of mini sermon that he does about right hand, left hand is directly quoted in Do the Right Thing, the Spike Lee film, where Radio Raheem has his rings, love and hate, that he presents to the camera in one scene. There's also shots in this that I think are directly copied in movies like Hereditary, particularly that final shot of Hereditary where we kind of see the triangular treehouse from a distance, kind of enveloped in blackness, this triangle. And that is very similar to the scene in Night of the Hunter where Mitchum is preparing to kill Willa, and he's standing at the window, and we kind of have this set back view as if we're kind of looking into a doll house. So an incredibly visually interesting movie. To me, it also feels very tonally influential of somebody like David Lynch, where we get those ideas of like the little suburban small town, but there's something very kind of rotten and evil running underneath it. And even the more dreamlike moments. I think one of the strongest scenes in the whole movie is right after John and Pearl have escaped from Powell, and they're going down the river. And you have this scene where Pearl is singing a little, it's not even a nursery rhyme. It's like this make-believe little sing-song story to herself as we get shots of just the animals observing them down the river. That feels so incredibly ahead of its time and not like anything else from the 50s or the 60s or arguably even the 70s. It's this very unique, dreamlike feel. But where the issues do come in for me, and I'll agree with Mitchell on a few points here, are kind of the tone and the second half. I do think once we meet, oh my goodness, I forgot that actress's name, but she plays the old woman that they stay with. She kind of finds them along the river, and Lillian Gish. She was a silent star who kind of was. This is before they sort of did these comeback roles for actors, but it kind of was for her. If the movie hadn't crashed and burned, of course. But once they're kind of staying with her and she becomes the surrogate mother or almost grandfather or grandmother figure for them, this sort of Mother Goose figure, I do think it gets a bit twee. But of course, you need that setup for the payoff at the end, which I think is incredibly strong. We have that showdown between her and Mitchum. He's out in the yard and she's on the porch. And I love that stuff. I will agree the kids are occasionally a bit weak. I think Lawton knows that he has to direct around Pearl. So Pearl, more often than not, I think is fine. But John, especially when he has to just do a reaction shot, is occasionally really, really awkward. There's a shot in this where he's like deceiving Powell. He's trying to hide something from him. And Mitchum gives this great read. I think every moment from him in this is great. And John, I think the direction was probably chuckle nervously, but John goes, like Ringo's first line on A Hard Day's Night, and it doesn't work. And there's a couple other moments from him like that I think are a bit too big, or they could have worked with him a little more. And the way that Charles Lawton directed this especially, I'm sure that was like the best they could get. Because when they were making this, unusual for the time, Lawton just left the cameras running. And which means there's lots of interesting behind the scenes footage and audio of him kind of directing them from behind the camera. But they had a lot of footage and they used the best they could, which means for some shots, they probably didn't have what they needed. But yeah, it's a 3 out of 5 for me. I do think it's a great film, but let's concentrate more on Powell. Unless, Christian, you have a rebuttal to my child point.
Christian, Zach said the same point I did, and then Christian looked way more upset when Zach said it because he knew what point of view it was coming from.
He was expecting Bachelor of Sciences in Film and Moving Image to come to his aid, but
yeah, wow. I'll have to think about that. Biases against Zach, But I do want to go to bat for the kids a little bit, and this is something that I mentioned in my review and took note of while I was watching. I think they're, for the most part, quite good, and I'm a really big fan, actually, of the kid that plays John for most of his scenes. I hadn't recalled that awkward laugh scene, Zach, but now that you've mentioned it, it's coming back to me. And there are moments like that where their awkwardness or their lack of, I'm sure, screen experience shows. But I think for the most part, the awkwardness with which they play their characters mirrors the natural awkwardness a child would have. And so I think in most cases, like when Pearl's just being like weird or crying or whatever, I don't think you get a sense that Pearl is really like affectionate towards the actress that plays her mother, for example. But I do think with the big emotional moments for John, like very early on in the movie when his dad gets taken away, and he like promises never to tell anyone where the money's being hidden, and then he has these big exclamations of no when the police are cuffing his dad. I think that is fantastic. And when we get that similar scene towards the end when Powell's being taken away and sort of against all logic, it's like reliving this trauma for him, and it sort of brings out the same response even though he despises Powell. I think that's like such a gem of a movie moment, and one that doesn't really hit if he's not being convincing on a level. So I would defend the kid that plays John Harper, but I do see some of your points and some of the situational.
Those are strong moments. I will give you that. Yeah, well, we stopped to defend the children for a while, I guess, as is our obligation,
and the women too.
But let's talk about Powell. Christian, you said that he was probably going to be the topic of a lot of our discussion, and let's sink our teeth into it because I think, I mean, he is great. I think he's why people remember the movie.
Yeah, from a performance standpoint and from a script standpoint, I think he's so constantly impressionable. You get this authentic for a movie representation of a psychopath, and I think some of his most chilling moments are towards the beginning, like when he's at the I don't know if you would call that a peep show or whatever it was, but he was like
the burlesque show, maybe
at some sort of we'll say burlesque show, and he's just having this really nasty, like I don't know if you would almost call it like an incel moment where he's just like fantasizing about killing. Yeah,
the knife is definitely like a hate erection. That
imagery is obvious for sure. And I think I just commend his performance, and also what this film tells us about charismatic people being potentially dangerous, and how dangerous it is to take someone at the surface level. Of course, there's a lot about the power dynamics of a relationship and a marriage, especially in 1950, being that the second they're married, he doesn't treat Shelley Winters at all like he did when he was charming her and the townsfolk. And it's interesting how he plays towards the kids and how he plays towards other adults. And at times it seems like he almost has less faith in the adults being discerning than he does in the children, which is interesting. And he does a lot with his eyes and his voice. And the knuckle tattoos seem like something that should be a bigger obstacle for him to present as normal.
Yeah.
But he has this like very folksy pseudo preacher way of explaining it away that just works. It's a fascinating performance, and one that I certainly don't get tired of in 93 minutes.
Yeah, that first like actual horrific shot, that first of all, use of lighting and shadows is like A1 the whole film.
Yeah.
But especially when he's first introduced, because I mean you'll have like the dragging on orchestral brass in the background when you have somebody that has like a shadow projected on a wall. But I don't remember if there was anything playing during that, but I don't think there really was. I think, or maybe it was very mellow and I just don't remember, but I was so locked in the scene. And you just see the shadow of his face on the wall, and you're like, okay, so you'll see a shadow move. But no, it literally goes directly out the window, and he's just standing there by the lamppost. It's like the worst nightmare ever. And I'm like, oh my God, like that's actually stressing me out the way he's standing there right now. That just goes back to the otherworldliness too. You feel like unless it's the daytime, like lighting is just coming out of these crazy areas, and it's like it really feels like they're like on a floating island in space or something, and it's just really, it really just lends credibility to his acting, and just having the scene set like that with that, you know, a very modest production, but just very thoughtful. It just makes you hone in on everything he's saying, and it's just, I mean, yeah, it calls back to like sociopaths and psychopaths and serial killers of more modern times, and it's also just not really a topic that's really pursued that much at this time period. You can't like name any serial killer from the 50s. Like it's kind of difficult to even think about that, you know, because a lot of the big ones, at least in the US, are in the 70s and 80s for the most part. But like, yeah, it's just he's super suave. You feel like when he walks in a room, he already knows, he's already worked it. It's like he's already been there and he knows everybody. So it's really hard to have that level of a performance, and I really don't have like any criticism of it at all.
Yeah, he's super smooth in some context because he knows what he can get, but then in others he's like a total clownish oaf. It's interesting. He's not just this kind of ultimate villain. I think it's apt, Mitchell, that you mentioned that it kind of feels like the world is sort of like floating in this otherworldly space, because the movie opens in space, as we see Lillian Gish telling this story, and I think that's appropriate because it does feel like at times this is sort of like a children's bedtime story, and the way that Powell is presented, he feels like kind of the warped ghoul at the heart of that, in the way that he's lit. I mean, one of the best moments in the whole film, I think, is at the end where he's trying to get into the house to get to Pearl and John. And you know he's in the kitchen somewhere, but he's like ducking down so you can't see him. And then the cat yowls and he jumps up and there's this light coming from directly under him. Where's that coming from? I don't know, but it makes him look just like a ghoul. So it works in that moment. But then as soon as he pops up, he gets shot in the arm. And he runs out like a yowling oaf, whose plan has just completely failed. Or in the cellar where the shelf falls on him, and he makes the most pathetic "I got a boo boo" face before he chases Pearl and John up the steps. It's a great sinister performance, but at the same time, I think it's often quite funny as well. And maybe not directly, but I think some deliveries of his are just so well done that you can't help but laugh. There's a great, I think, very quotable moment that sticks in your head where he's trying to get Pearl to tell him where the money is at the kitchen table. And she says, "Oh, but John told me not to tell." And he hits the table and goes, "Never mind what John said." And that's just the way he says that is stuck in my head. Yeah, it's a great performance, and he's shot so well. And one of those moments, I think, that is on like behind the scenes content, which again you don't get a lot of from this era because film was expensive, so it was uncommon that a shot ran longer than it needed to, and you could hear and see a director working with an actor. But that bit where John and Pearl get away on the skiff, on the rowboat, however you would describe it. And he's running after them and stops, and he just has a moment where he almost looks like he's about to cry before he like wails that they've gone, he's lost them. You can see in the behind the scenes Lawton kind of talking him through it behind the camera. Okay, Bob, a bit more upset this time. You're about to cry. Give me more of a hang in your mouth, and you can really kind of see them working through that, which I think is really interesting. But there are more adults in this movie.
There are.
Christian, you liked a review on Letterboxd to this movie that I thought made an interesting point, where it said something along the lines of Harry Powell is like a threatening villain, but Icy Spoon is worse, who is this old woman who lives in the town where John and Pearl are growing up with their mother, who, as soon as Powell arrives, is immediately convinced that he's the, you know, the best man in the world, and, oh, wouldn't it be great if Willa, this poor widow, were to get together with him. And we see lots of characters like this who are either adults that fall in line with Powell very quickly, or they fail to live up to their promises, like Uncle Bertie, who's sort of this man who lives down by the river, who's fixing up the boat for John, who says, hey, well, I'm your friend, I'll help you out if you're in trouble, and then just completely fails to live up to that when they do eventually need his help, to at the end when, you know, the mob springs up to try to kill Powell while he's in his cell, too much too late. Is this film, I guess my question is the film saying something, do we think, about the roles of adults in children's lives, or are these just characters that have to be there to make this particular story work the way that it needs to play out?
I think both can be true. I think the review that you're referencing said that Icy Spoon was maybe not worse, but more dangerous, just because of the impact that she can have on other people in her sort of place in the community. And yeah, I think the performances are more or less acceptable. When I first saw Ben Harper, the John's father, in the opening scenes, I thought, oh, this guy's performance is pretty rough. It really seemed like he was just reading cue cards. It was giving like Lizzo in The Mandalorian energy. But oh gosh, back to the question, which is much more insightful than Star Wars Illusions. Yeah, I don't think those two things are at odds. I think it's interesting that the uncle fails to play a part, and it's interesting to think about how this plays into the sort of reflexive religious offense this takes at Powell being this false preacher. I don't think that this movie necessarily looks down on people of faith at all. I just think it sends a message about critical thinking and not taking people at face value, and not being charmed by, ultimately, obviously, Preacher Powell does not represent a moral code or a spiritual way of living at all. It's a facade. And so distinguishing between those things and realizing what really matters in life is not just, I don't know, getting married because you absolutely should be married to the first charming guy that comes along. And maybe these are really spicy takes for the 50s, but I think it all, the other adult performances contribute toward this message about thoughtfulness and our place in the world.
Yeah, I'd almost say, using, at least with Icy and Walt, it's like their gossip kind of helps balance the tone, but also helps inform the audience. And kind of keeps you in the know about like what the town is really about, to kind of through these characters. And you know, Rachel, right? Is her name Rachel Cooper? Okay. Rachel's like the moral compass, you know, the one that's like, this is what Christianity really is type kind of backdrop. And you kind of need all those things, especially because, you know, him being a preacher and kind of, you know, trying to have his mark on the town in such a short amount of time, just to have these, you know, nefarious needs or wants, is kind of important to have that level playing field, I guess, and having the counterweight with the supporting characters. And like, I mean, they're pretty good. Like just like I was saying, with some of those like cliche moments where just, you know, why they're there and why they exist to be a counterweight, but you don't really feel their necessity for too long. Like, you're like, oh, okay, we need those types of characters. And then like the next time you see them and the next time you see them, it's just like, okay. I kind of get the point already. Would be my only negative thing, but all in all, like that, the performances were pretty convincing. Yeah, the guy by the river, at least the man by the river, like, you know, he finds the murdered mother, and you get the whole moral part of that. I see their purpose, but all in all, not a huge impact on me. The film is still really about Robert Mitchum being insane.
And it could be that those characters aren't necessarily there to contribute to some kind of a moral or a theme, and that they're more there for John's arc, because I think John starts the movie, and until the midpoint is this character who has kind of been forced to grow up really fast and is kind of struggling with that. He really hasn't grown up really fast, but he's in this situation where he has to. And he's finding that a lot of these adults that he thought he could rely on, he cannot. His mother is, you know, under the sway of this man who wishes them ill. Icy and Walt in town, seemingly all the adults in town are similarly, you know, just falling straight in line with this man's rhetoric. Uncle Bertie, maybe, I think the only friend we ever see John talk to in the movie, in his time of need, you know, fails to come to his aid. And so we kind of get this feeling of him being very distrusting and feeling like he and Pearl are totally alone in the world and don't have anybody to rely on until they meet Rachel. And that's sort of his arc after that becomes him learning to trust and rely on this woman, which eventually comes to a head during the final Christmas scene when he gives her the humblest gift, but it indicates his trust and appreciation and love for her, which is kind of where that arc has ended. I have found somebody I can rely on when the world had previously taught me that wasn't possible. And maybe that's just what that all contributes to, rather than some kind of core theme about mob justice. I think at least all those smaller characters do have arcs. Even the hangman, who at the beginning of the movie seems like he's going to have this arc where he's like, oh, mother, I'm never going to hang again. But it's the complete opposite at the end, where Powell is getting carted off the jail and he goes, well, this time it'll be a privilege, which feels like it's a deliberate joke.
You'll be back.
I think we've kind of talked through the entirety of the movie. I think it's a good movie. I think it's a very solid movie. I do think you should watch it. And I do think it's a Christmas movie. We didn't talk a lot about it, but I think the final theming, the final scenes are very Christmassy. It ends on Christmas presents and Christmas decorations. There's a scene that feels like it's straight out of a Universal monster movie, with an angry mob wielding torches walking in front of a Christmas tree. And I think if all that kind of in black and white kind of scratches your Christmas itch, which for me it does, I do think you'd, as a viewer, you would enjoy this.
Yeah, I can see some of the complaints about it feeling slow. It is a movie from the 50s, even though it refutes that time in many ways. Mm-hmm. But I would argue that it being only 93 minutes long means that even those longer feeling lapses don't bring you down as much as a 2-hour movie or longer from that era might. Also interesting to note that cinematographer Stanley Cortez, also the cinematographer for The Magnificent Ambersons, which we discussed a season or so back. Interesting. It didn't really, I don't know. This does seem like a movie that Orson Welles would really, really like. So I wonder if he saw it and sort of had the opposite reaction that the public
When did
had.
The Trial come out?
I want to say 1960.
Because there could definitely be some influence from this on The Trial and all the heavy shadows and more kind of impressionistic sequences.
The Trial was 1962. Okay. So yeah, could be.
That's interesting.
Robert Mitchum's last role was in Dead Man. So it's all coming back together.
It was. I completely forgot he was a Cookie Pocket alum.
Yep.
Season 1 That's Cookie crazy. Pocket alum.
Yep. Ancient history at this point.
History. But he has still only appeared on the show in black and white.
Yep. He couldn't leave to the color realm. But yeah.
Was he in Scrooged? What?
He
what
was
is,
in
what is
Scrooged. He
this?
has been. He's the head of the network
Wow,
in
okay.
Scrooged.
Oh,
The
yeah.
one who's like, we need to start making TV for cats.
Ah.
He kind of looks different being older. I mean, you can see when you see him side by side, but like he looks kind of different.
Yeah, it's the head shape. You got to trace the head shape with Mitchum, because facially he looks very different when he gets older. Kind of like Jimmy Stewart. Jimmy Stewart, the way that Dick Van Dyke looks now is how I would have expected an old Jimmy Stewart to look, but it's not really how he ended up.
No,
a handsome skeleton.
Yeah.
more round.
Yeah, 90 minute film is pretty good. It honestly, Twilight Zone. I feel like it reminded me a lot of Twilight Zone.
Yeah.
There's a little bit more weight behind the production and the acting, but there are some Twilight Zone episodes that pack a lot in a short amount of time, at least from a filmmaking standpoint and the level of emotion and themes discussed. So that would be my closest comparison experience wise.
Yeah, I can definitely see that, especially the stuff where they're running away from Powell. And that's the part of the movie where Powell is kind of at his most bad dream monsterish. There's that scene where they're in the barn and they hear him singing and he's on his horse going across the horizon. And John even said, doesn't he ever sleep? And you get that feeling of him being this impossible force that's going to keep pursuing them. Some people call this a horror film. I don't think that's entirely accurate. But there is certainly horror of a kind in there that if I saw this when I was a kid, I don't know if it would, give me nightmares, but it would certainly make me feel kind of weird, and give me some weird impressions on things, certainly.
I would probably fall asleep, but then my dad would put on Subspecies, and then I would get upset.
Yes, Robert Mitchum is no Radu.
Yep.
All right. Is it time we talk week in review?
It's time. Christian, go first.
Who wants to jump in? Okay, fine. Gosh, I'm getting appointed to a lot of things today.
You're welcome.
that I did not run for.
You're welcome.
I guess I'll keep it with Charles Laughton and talk a bit more about Witness for the Prosecution. This was a Blu-ray I grabbed a while back that had been sitting on my shelf for a while, and just, I'm trying to watch all the Billy Wilder classics, and I'm only sort of halfway-ish there. And being that I am a law student for at least the next 6 or 7 months more, I'm trying to get in like a lot of law adjacent movies now because I feel like they'll hit harder. So I threw this one on. And it's not what I expected in many respects. I had no idea that this was originally an Agatha Christie story. I didn't know that it was adapted from the stage. And I didn't know that that Charles Laughton had third billing, which is absurd because this is his movie. He's playing such a larger-than-life character. He easily has the most screen time. I was very surprised and entertained by this movie. I saw somebody online said 12 Angry Men is the best courtroom drama outside the courtroom, and this is probably the best one inside it. I could see where they're coming from with that. There's a lot of, especially towards the end, really compelling twists. Maybe one twist too many because the ending is just like, oh, this happens and then that and then oh. There's so many fake outs that it's maybe a little bit too much. And I only almost predicted one of them though. So even though this is about 60 years old now, I think that Christie's writing is still really sharp and effective. There's this bit that Charles Laughton's character does when he's trying to assess if a character is telling him the truth, where he takes his monocle and he reflects the glare of the light right into the person's face to make them squirm a little bit, as though doing that gives them the power to read their mind. And that's a funny thing. Tyrone Power plays the defendant in the case, and he's got this really interesting performance that's smarmy, but also victimized, and Marlene Dietrich plays his wife, who is kind of like a femme fatale in a way, and very unnerving. at times. And this is just a very entertaining watch. It was, let's see, 116 minutes, but it didn't really feel that, especially for a 50s film. If you have interest in courtroom drama or in Billy Wilder's work as a director, I would definitely recommend it. It was a 4.5 stars for me.
Nice. Well, we're recording these farther ahead of time than we have in the past, or at least we're recording this first one. Who knows what'll happen in the second and the third. So it was just Halloween. I haven't quite had a chance to get into the seasonal swing yet, so I don't have anything especially Christmassy or holiday-ish to talk about in our holiday special and weekend review. So I'm going to settle for cold as Christmassy and talk about Willem Dafoe in the movie Siberia. Now, I wouldn't blame you if you haven't heard of this movie. It's very indie. I think it made a box office receipt of about like $25,000. But this is an Abel Ferrara film. And Abel Ferrara in the 70s and 80s was this kind of underground, very progressive New York director who made these very kind of indie fringe movies, things like Miss 45, The Driller Killer, which was a video nasty, but is mainly for like 2 scenes. Other than that, it's mostly a movie about a struggling artist hanging out in a loft and trying to sell a painting of a bull. And then he moved kind of into crime movies, which I think are a very different take on the genre to Scorsese. And eventually, after 9/11, he moved to Europe because he felt it was easier to find funding for his projects there. And since then, he's gone kind of entirely into very kind of digital, introspective, psychological projects. And he's done several collaborations with Willem Dafoe, including this movie Siberia, which, funnily enough, reminded me a lot of my senior capstone project, The Search for Alexander. Now, that could sound like a boast because it's made by a filmmaker I really enjoy, and maybe it is to some extent, but I'm talking narratively, in that both of the films are about characters who are kind of suspended in this limbo-like situation and encounter lots of bizarre visuals and characters that aren't explained to a great extent as they kind of journey through this space. If you were talking literally, the movie is about Willem Dafoe. He has a cabin in Siberia. People occasionally visit, and he plays kind of tavern keep and will pour them a drink, or they can play on his slot machine or whatever. And then eventually he decides he has to go on a journey. We're not really told why. And he goes through this sort of barren, snowy wasteland, encountering firing squads. At one point, he's in a cave full of plague victims and diseased people who think he's a doctor. He encounters his own father, played by, again, Willem Dafoe with his face covered in shaving cream.
Awesome.
Oh, geez.
And the movie is based directly on Jungian philosophy. It's based on, Ferrara said it was based on Jung's Red Book, which is not a novel or anything like that. It's literally notes on psychological and psychiatric thought processes and sort of the expression of the self and aspects of the self. If you're not into anything like that, if you're not into abstract, if you're not into interpretive, if you're not into a movie not entirely making sense, you will hate this. And even I was kind of just lukewarm on it, though that wasn't for the content as much as it was for some of the style. Particularly recently, Ferrara has gotten into things being very, very digital and handmade and almost like these digital collages. But I think sometimes that comes across as incredibly tacky, and this movie usually avoids it. But there is a scene where a literal vertical cell phone video of Ferrara's, I think it's Ferrara's mother, just kind of speaking about her memories of his childhood, just kind of like fades in over the frame and then fades out. And it's clearly just a vertical cell phone video hanging out in the corner while Willem Dafoe is looking around in the snowy wasteland, and then it fades away. And some stuff like that does irk me. But other than that, it is quite cinematic and it's quite eventful. Willem Dafoe fights a bear. Like I said, he goes through all these trials and tribulations. It is not a boring movie. I do think it's entertaining. But if you're not into first things first, if you're not into Ferrara, if you don't know who Abel Ferrara is, I would not recommend that as a starting point. And you probably won't like it if you're not into his brand of cinema. And again, if you're not into interpretive, it's probably not gonna hit either. So a middling recommendation for Siberia. Willem Dafoe is great. If you want to see Willem Dafoe essentially doing interesting acting exercises for about 90 minutes, you can't go wrong with it, or basically any other project he's done with Abel Ferrara. But it's a niche interest. It's a 3 out of 5, and hopefully I'll have something a little more festive to talk about next time.
I don't have anything festive. It was just Halloween. So I watched I would argue, I haven't thought a lot about this, but thinking about it now, I'd probably say they're my 3 favorite horror films ever.
Okay.
So I watched them back to back. I started with Blair Witch Project, and then Curse of the Blair Witch, which is like the supplementary fake documentary. I'm not counting that one, Zach.
Oh, okay.
I don't know if a thumb is okay. Yeah, there we go. Zach is back to 1. Okay. Then The Thing, the good one, and Evil Dead 2.
Oh, okay.
And I would say those are probably my top 3. But the one I have to defend the Blair Witch Project. Okay, I have to defend it. A rare. I can't think of the last time I changed my rating. Did that just cut out? I don't know.
For like a word of
okay.
audio.
For like a word? Okay.
Yeah.
I don't remember the last time I changed my rating on Letterboxd, but I was definitely feeling the 4.5 this time, especially when it's really late at night and you're by yourself.
Mm-hmm.
I do not recommend watching this film with other people at all, actually. I think this is one of those few films where the experience, after seeing it, I've seen this like over 10 times probably, it is 100% like you will be fully engaged the first time if you just watch it in the dark and just like buy into the vision. Now, I would say with I'll comment on the Curse of the Blair Witch Project, or Curse of the Blair Witch is the name. This was a sci-fi fake mockumentary-ish sci-fi premiere thing. It just randomly came up on the Sci-Fi Network when it was called that. I think it's called something else now, but it literally is like interviews with their quote unquote brother and sister and parents and other townspeople and professors in the class of the students talking about how they were missing and everything. And it's just like, man, this, and then they go back to like this fake 70s reel about how to summon witches and you know, an actual self-declared guy that's a witch. And it's like playing off of all these tropes of these like random like late at night History Channel and sci-fi stuff where it'd be like, man, oh, like, you know, I watched this one show where it was like the guy woke up and he had a mark from an arrow because he got shot in his dream, and like all these dreams are real, it actually happened. But not only that, but being like the first major internet marketed film in 1999 was a pretty big deal. So any average Joe that knows nothing about like filmmaking or knows nothing about marketing, you're in the Phantom Menace, and this is one of the films that's shown beforehand as an advertisement. You're like, man, those kids are missing. That's crazy. and it just, that whole thing it really showed how much weight marketing has. Now obviously, getting into the film really quick, it's a phenomenal found footage film. It basically set the standard going forward. What doesn't happen is the most scary, and that sometimes is one of the hardest things to achieve in a horror film, is to make what you don't see and what's unknown actually frightening. And because they're taking at this angle of a found footage film, also with a DAT, a really old camera that's black and white, doesn't have audio capability and stuff. There's just a lot of really interesting nuances. And obviously the direction is very, very limited on purpose. They leave notes for the actors, places to say, this is what your next scene's going to be. A lot of it was completely improvised. And a lot of the dialogue was extremely naturalistic and believable. And it makes you scared to camp ever again. Honestly, you just think about it, you know, It's rocks and stuff, rock formations and sticks in the trees, and it's just like, yeah, I mean, I believe it. Like he basically come out of it like it's possible, it could be real, and that's what makes it a really really great film. So not a lot of people are into it. If you don't have that buy-in in the beginning, and some people don't, I've had that experience before, then it's really just not your type of film. But it's just very naturalistic. There's not a lot of structure to it. It kind of just unravels as it unravels, and you're either kind of along for the ride or not. But just little sounds like clacking of rocks in the woods just scares anybody, and it really takes advantage of that in the film. And obviously the actors just got their due in the past like year. I think Michael Donahue just talked about that, and he's been on podcasts recently talking about the film. But I think Artisan Entertainment officially paid them out for what they actually deserved. Because I don't think they got paid anything. I don't remember exactly, but I'm fairly certain they didn't get anything when it came out. So,
well, Christian, what are we watching on our next holiday special? We're not doing Game of the Game rules, so you have to preview it for us this time.
Am I next?
You are next.
Yeah.
Oh no!
Unless we want to break the cycle and give it to Mitchell, but we were running on Game of the Game rotation, so that would make you next.
Oh gosh.
Yep.
Oh gosh. Oh man. Oh gosh.
Oh man. God. Oh man.
Well.
Oh man. Oh jeez. Oh man.
Okay. I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna just go with my first impulse, which is we are going to watch Brazil, Terry Gilliam's dystopian sci-fi film that's sort of become a cult classic. And Gilliam is a multiple-time Cookie Pocket alumnus. First, we discussed The Man Who Killed Don Quixote, and later we discussed Monty Python and the Holy Grail. So we hope to see you for this one too.
Well, join us for Brazil next time. Happy holidays. Please continue to have happy holidays, because this will probably come out about 2 weeks before Christmas Eve. It'd be a shame if everything goes south at that point. We'll see you next time.
Bye.